and welcome to what is part three of our Edinburgh Fringe Preview podcasts. And in this one, I'll be talking to writer and performer Cora Bissett about his show When Billy Met Alasdair, the Billy being Billy Connolly and the Alasdair being Alasdair Gray. But before that, I'm going to talk to James Clements, who is actor, writer, and theatre maker behind the Burns Project. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another of our Fringe Preview podcasts. And I'm joined now by actor, writer, and theatre maker James Clements to talk all about the Burns Project. Hello, James.
Hello, Alistair. How are you doing?
I'm really well, and I'm excited to talk to you about this in particular. So tell us all about the Burns Project.
Aye, absolutely. So, started working on it about 18 months ago, was the kind of beginning of the project. I approached the National Trust for Scotland, who, as perhaps some of your listeners will know, amongst the many incredible properties and gardens they hold in trust for the Scottish people, they manage the Robert Burns Birthplace Museum in Alloway, which includes his childhood cottage, an incredible museum, and a really brilliant archive of lots of his letters, his lyrics, his socks, really his wedding bands, and a brilliant collection. About 2 years ago, I believe, they received funding to digitize that collection. So now,
Right.
whether you're in Shanghai or LA or Paris or Arran or wherever you are, you can log on, for free and see these incredible resources and sources. So I'm a documentary source-based theatre maker, so using archives, interviews, other sources as the basis for creating theatre about historical, social, political characters, figures, and questions. So I approached Philip Long, the wonderful executive director at the Trust, and pitched kind of an artist in residence position where I could turn this incredible archive they have into a theatre piece about Burns's life that used his words as the basis to really study the contradictions and the sometimes complicated or difficult incongruities in his behavior and in his writing and in his politics, that I felt there was a lot to explore there and a lot of nuance that was missing in the conversation. And I thought we're better to kind of start than the archive.
It is an incredible. I haven't been there for a few years now, but certainly the last time I was down, the museum had just had a bit of a makeover and everything, and some of the artifacts are incredible. And you talk about it being digitized for kind of global access. And here's one character who deserves that global access because his reach is as far and wide as you suggest.
I absolutely. And um one of the show's essentially a two-person show. It's myself playing Robert Burns and then a wonderful Edinburgh-based musician and composer, Lisa Rigby, kind of acting as my foil, as Burns's foil. So a bit of a narrator, a bit of a more reliable narrator than him sometimes, as well as playing some of his incredible music and poetry, and some of her own brilliant compositions. So it's sort of set around a take on a Burns supper table. So the audience is seated around a table in the Georgian House in the middle of Edinburgh in Charlotte Square, which is one of the National Trust properties here. And we sort of take you through a kind of fever dream of this incredible life, of a really exceptional person. Everything I say is from that archive. It's from his letters, it's from his writings. Lisa provides a kind of musical and cultural context. And then the third ingredient, which I love and has been kind of the brainchild of myself and our brilliant director, Cora Bissett, is contemporary interviews with Scottish people today about Robert Burns that are woven through the piece. And we spoke to brilliant academics at the Centre for Robert Burns Studies at Glasgow University. We spoke to incredible poets like Iona Lee, academics like Lisa Williams, people that really know their stuff. And we went into Tennent's on Byres Road at noon on a Tuesday, and we went into Oxfam Music uh, on Byres Road. We went into the Botanics in Queen's Park over on the south side and did more guerrilla style interviews. And the combination is incredibly important, I think, because he was the people's poet. You know, it's certainly not a solely academic pursuit to understand Burns. I don't think you can understand him only through that lens. So you have this brilliant kind of dichotomy of the expert and the non-expert voices kind of informing a more perhaps intellectual or emotional understanding of him and what he means today. So we've hopefully created a piece of, we keep using the word punk, like Robert Burns was a punk, I think. And so we hope it's not your sort of biscuit tin Burns. It's not a museum piece. It's provocative, it's political, it's punk. And I hope it's fair. I think it's really fair, um, because I have lived lived with his work as every Scottish person has before I can remember. You know, he's integral to our weddings. He's integral to our funerals. To Hogmanay, to, you know, he's really, the more you think about it, the more deeply ingrained he is into so much of our culture and language. And I felt like a piece of hero worship doesn't really do him justice, nor does a sort of contemporary analysis that judges him from a 2025 lens.
Mhm.
Neither's useful to us as Scottish people today. I don't think. So, aye,
I can
hopefully.
imagine you saying the kind of punk Burns. I can imagine Vivienne Westwood making him a fantastic outfit. She would really know how to dress Robert Burns, no doubt about
Oh,
it.
aye, exactly. And
And
he's got
what,
such a,
as we're talking, it strikes me, I presume, is this an hour-long show?
yeah, hour-long Fringe show.
How have you managed to fit it all in?
I have to give big props, and the team is incredible. The whole design team and production team are too many brilliant folks to name, but I
Yeah.
think both Lisa and Cora, the musician, composer, and director, really were integral to that editing process because I'd spent weeks in both in the archive in Alloway and the digital archive because I spent half my year over in New York, half my year here in Scotland. So even when I was over in the States, I was able to be looking at these handwritten documents. So I just had pages, I mean, enough for like a 6 episode miniseries, pages of letters. And of course, when you're writing, you're like, everything here is essential. Nothing can be missed, nothing can be lost. And what was great about Cora and Lisa is the three of us kind of um, came to partly practical, but also partly kind of emotional understanding that this is not a biopic. This is
Mm.
not a Netflix series where we are saying we're hitting every single event, every lover, every child, every collection of poetry, every sibling. That's not our kind of MO, which really liberated me to cut a lot of material that even though he's Robert Burns, everything he writes is pretty beautiful, but really trusting that the music and the lyrics and the poetry that he created tell a lot of that story, which Lisa did. And then Cora and I, under kind of Cora's guidance, being really discerning about what we kept from the letters, what was really essential, and actually then making space for, as we were doing more and more of these interviews. I mean, the things, as people who are listening and if they can make the show will hear, it's just pure gold hearing people talk about him and realizing whether these people that are speaking like him or not, whether they know about the kind of darker aspects perhaps of his life or not, everyone had an opinion. And so it became a kind of exciting challenge for me to give Robert the space that he deserves in his story, but also give other voices the space they deserve in a show about Scotland and in a show about uh, our bard, and
Yeah.
really thinking, who gets to be Scottish, who gets to own that identity. How do we ensure his music and his writing serve Scotland today, which looks very different than it did, 250 years ago. Of course it does, and as it should. Um, so I think the long-winded answer to your very simple question was, I think, just good collaborators.
Yeah.
Good collaborators and a tough editing process.
So you've mentioned where we can see it, but would you let people know when we can see it and what the run is?
I absolutely. So it's very exciting. We're here at the Georgian House in Charlotte Square, which folks who know Edinburgh will know is sort of the end of Princes Street, 15 minutes walk from the train, very central location. We are running the 2nd to the 16th at 6:30 p.m. every night. The run is entirely sold out.
Right.
Um, but there will be wait lists and tickets on the day, and we hope to get to get as many people in as we can. But if you don't catch it at the Fringe, we'll be touring Scotland in November to National Trust properties all over the country. So those dates will be coming soon. And if you follow National Trust for Scotland on socials, you'll get all that info. And then if you've got international listeners, we'll be over in the US doing a tour March 26th. So hopefully a long life.
That's fantastic that it's sold out already, but I think that in itself speaks to the popularity of anything Robert Burns related.
Totally.
And I'm wondering if your link with the National Trust of Scotland meant you got this incredible venue in this incredible location. Not many people would get that.
No, definitely. And I really want to give a big shout out to the folks at National Trust for Scotland because they're not theatre producers. They're not uh, necessarily used to working with a team of artists, and they have been so brilliant. And I think we've taught each other a lot, about what this process would look like. Because my hope is it can be a pilot for the trust to have different artists in residence over many years. Maybe it's a Gaelic poet who goes to Canna House and creates a poetry book over a year. Maybe it's a Scottish artist of colour that explores the links between trust properties and the slave trade. Like there's lots of different ways in which these incredible buildings and incredible archives can and should be activated. So doing it site specific was always kind of the the goal because there's something about placing him in these houses. I mean, the Georgian House was building was completed the year he died. So you
Mm,
have to think the last trips he was taking to Edinburgh, he was probably taking tours of the fledgling new town.
right.
So there's a weight to it, and I think a lot of my interest certainly in Burns for the purpose of our work on this show was Burns as a lens to understand and interrogate Scottish masculinity and what that looks like and what that has looked like and what it might look like. And if you're engaging with anything to do with anything, really, you can't ignore class and the role that class plays. And placing our set and our interpretation of Burns and his music and his, radical punkness in these drawing rooms where he himself, when the Kilmarnock edition came out, would have been such a fish out of water.
Mm,
It feels kind of political, or at least it feels, yeah, provocative and interrogative to put this show in these properties and ask our audiences to engage with these questions around class, social justice, empire, identity, without beating them over the head with it. Because no one comes to the theatre, I don't believe, to be lectured.
no.
That's not our uh, toolkit as artists. Our toolkit is something different. It's to make you empathize and to feel and to relate or not relate. That feels like what's political about our work. And so being in these incredible buildings inherently asks some of those questions.
Yeah.
Especially when he's talking about his childhood and his later years and the sort of ongoing, relative poverty that he lived in a lot of his life, even after he was um, a kind of celebrated poet, still working as an excise man, still trying to keep the family home together. Uh, so yeah, very excited to be doing it in these houses, and as I said, really not shying away from the three occasions in which he nearly went over to Jamaica, not shying away from the ways in which he mistreated women of his own class while venerating these women of a different class. And yes, that feels like the question for me as a male identifying Scottish person
Mhm.
is what is Scottish masculinity? What are the beautiful parts of it? And which to me is kind of the spirit of fraternity and chivalry and romance uh, and music and sociability, like the
Mhm.
really great things, and then the not so great things.
Yeah.
Um, and the way, yeah, some of the things that he writes about and some of the things he did are not out of place in 2025, and they should be.
And you mentioned that it's going to be the set's like a burn supper. Is that right? I was going to ask you what can audiences expect when they come in. It sounds like quite a arresting setup.
Yeah, it's. I don't want to give away too much,
Sure, sure.
but you
Well,
come
no.
into the drawing room at the Georgian House, which if you or any of your listeners have been here, it is an incredible property. It was restored recently, um, and I'd encourage anyone to come an hour early and catch the last tour an hour or two before the show. It's really quite something. But you walk into this 1700s drawing room. There is a long table. You take your seat. You're facing each other. You're facing the set by incredible set designer Jenny Booth. It is like real theatre magic. Because you're not in a traditional theatre, so there's not
Yeah,
projection screens, there's not a lighting grid, so everything is very analog and organic, and you sort of strap in for a wild hour.
that sounds amazing. So it's kind of in the round from what you're saying.
Aye, yeah. There's
Yeah.
not you're. I'm very cautious to use the word immersive because I feel
Yeah.
like some people are like, oh my God, I'm gonna have a top hat and a boa on, and it's like a
Ah,
magic show, and I'm gonna be mortified. It's not immersive like that, but you're definitely it's personal and it's intimate and it's very live for
and
sure.
I'm just wondering, as we're speaking, what you think it is about Burns that endures. I mean, it is. It seems that you can almost view Scotland's culture and history through the prism of this man. Do you think that's true?
I think so, absolutely. I think when you look at, for me, the kind of as a documentary theatre maker, as someone who researches and makes political theatre, when the more I've researched Burns and I've really, yeah, I feel like I really know the man, and there's some kind of transmission right now. I'm really spending sort of 18 hours a day with him as we prepare for the show. The kind of questions that I want to ask of the world as a citizen and as an artist around race, gender, class, nationality, nationalism, language, family heritage space, everyone you name, he becomes a kind of a, a diamond that's like refracting all of these things. And as you rotate him, more and more sort
Yeah.
of shades come out because, as I said, there was a very near miss, three very near misses, frankly, with him going to Jamaica to work as an overseer. I was not told that in school.
No, no.
That was not talked about my friends that did Scottish literature at university. And so, what does that say about Scotland's unwillingness to talk about our complicity in empire? People love to talk about how he was the bard of Scotland, but he died with debtors knocking at his door because what does that say about Scottish people's inability to talk about class and social injustice and how it permeates so many interactions? He had this hybrid relationship to language, um, where a lot of his poems are in Scots, his letters are in English. What does that say about Scottish assimilation into UK culture? He writes really
Yeah.
passionately about Scottish independence and identity, but then when he's pulled up by the excise, like flip of a switch, is pledging allegiance to king and constitution, What does that say about our own attitudes towards Britishness for us? So, like, really, without wanting to over exaggerate it, I feel like if people become iconic and people become, as I say, foundational to how we are born, get married, die, ring in New Year's, ring in birthdays, ring in graduations, if they really, very few people get, you've got Shakespeare, you've got Burns, you've got, people that really permeate. If they've done that, then they mean something to us. And that's what makes them such a useful tool to study ourselves. And then go off into many other
Yeah.
people, of course, because he can't speak for, the totality of Scottish culture. But what a rich starting point for anyone in Scotland who is asking these questions of the world.
And I also think, perhaps even more than someone like Shakespeare, you can't really separate the man and the work too much. There is such a great kind of you. I'm going to say you can't have one without the other. You know what I mean by that. But you will get people to just say, "Oh, never mind what he did and let's just enjoy the work." But I think with Burns in particular, we know so much. It's been so researched that you really can't look at one without the other.
No, and I think that that's what uh, feels so sometimes jarring about working on Burns' material because he was writing some of these love songs while not being great to women. And he was writing, and there's some controversy over whether he wrote the Slave's Lament or just interpreted and recorded it. But either way, he was putting it in a canon. But there isn't really letters where he condemns slavery. And you could go, well, yeah, it was a man of his time, but he was a romantic poet of his time. And other romantic poets were talking about it.
Yeah, and if you're going to take the good, a man's a man for all that, and say, yes, he was a man of all time, then you can't really take the other stuff and say, oh, but it was just of that time. You
Yeah,
can't really switch up
exactly.
that.
And same with his relationship to women. He was uh not to be sort of all Calvinist about it. I'm not saying that this is great either, but he was on that cutty stool in church at the time. It wasn't like at the time everybody was at it the way he was. Like it was noted by church, it was noted by his political behavior was noted by the excise. So if if we're going to celebrate his exceptional talents, it's not about holding him to a higher standard. It's not about holding him to today's standard, but it is about holding him to the standards of his time.
Yeah.
And I would argue he fell short of those many times. And there is something about it was so funny. I said this to my director Cora. I was like talking about like Scottish masculinity, and it was like moments that feel like really high ideals, and then times that you fall short of them. That feels to me, just feels that to me. And then she points out, she said that might just be all men all over the world. I was like,
I
maybe
was
that's
going to say,
true.
is that part of the empathy? Is
Yeah,
that, someone who's absolutely a brilliant genius water writer, one of the very, very best, but with feet of clay. And, we've got so many examples of those,
you know.
through the thing.
And then someone said it really a really interesting interview. So I mean, interviews are just bloody fascinating with Scottish people today about Burns. I love listening to them as I'm transitioning from one beat or scene to the other. They really inform it for me as an actor. But someone says, about his behavior towards women. Uh, I think the quote is like, "He's not Andrew Tate. He doesn't hate women." But that doesn't mean that his behavior wasn't misogynistic, right? Like, so it's also not about a canceling of people. It's not about blanket, um, a blanket kind of statement. It's really for me as an artist and for my incredible team, I think about leaning into that nuance. And another brilliant interviewee, I think I mentioned before, the poet Iona Lee also says something in the soundscape. Um, in a way, we don't, why do we need him to be a hero? Having heroes just gives you an excuse to not be brave yourself.
Mm,
And I was just like, it really,
yeah.
it's, I hope that people leave with questions about Burns, but also about themselves, about Scotland, about how they move through the world, about what they want the future of this country to look like socially, politically, culturally, um, uh, it's not neat and tidy.
No. And of course, it never is. And even in my lifetime, Burns has been viewed very differently throughout the kind of years and decades. And look, again stunned that you've managed to fit this into an hour. I can't believe you managed to do that. But but there have been other people who have played Burns. Have you looked at that in the past? Not many, I should say. Not many. For instance, there's not many film versions. I know that for a fact.
No, not many film versions. A friend of mine, a brilliant Scottish actor, Alan Cumming, did an interpretation with the National Theatre a couple of years ago, which was brilliant, but was more in the dance theatre space. And I know there's been many plays before that sort of have the romantic poet, the ploughman's poet side of him in the kind of tradition of a Lord Byron or a Sir Walter Scott that really take him as a literary figure. I have not really heard or researched or found anything that are about his non-lyric words.
Mhm. Yeah.
And that's what's felt really, really kind of my anchor is hearing him talk about his childhood, his relationship with his father, um, his relationship with Jean, with Clorinda, with his patrons, his pride of being a father. He talks so tenderly about his children, the loss of his children, and he talks about mental health. He says, I'm inclined to agree with those who maintain what are known as nervous affectations or in fact diseases of the mind. He's like, it's more than just my bad nerves. I need a brandy. Like something's really wrong here. And
Yeah.
so I think spending time with his letters, again, nothing, acknowledging there's nothing new under the sun. I've not kind of heard of that
Yeah.
on a staged Burns, and certainly that's what's informing my performance. And it's a great sense of responsibility. It's saying that I'm going to try and present an embodiment of this Scottish icon, and the only way that felt fair was to use his language. And if someone sees it and doesn't like it, they have to take that up with Robert Burns.
they, they might take it up with you.
They might, they
As the
might,
proxy Burns, they might do
they
that.
might. I'm very ready for that. I'm very aware that we probably have been too harsh for some purists and too soft for some.
Never get it right.
You'll never get it right.
And that means you're probably doing something right. I
And I
think
think that means that we're being punk, and that's what Burns would have wanted, I hope.
absolutely. James, this sounds like such an amazing show. I wish you all the very best with it. Before we go, you should remind listeners once again when and where they can see it and where they can find out more about it.
Absolutely. So it is at the Georgian House in Charlotte Square, Edinburgh, August 2nd to 16th at 6:30 p.m. There'll be a Scottish tour happening in November of this year and a US tour in March of next. National Trust for Scotland's website and Instagram will have those details as they come. And tickets for the Ed Fringe run, as and when they become available, are through the Ed Fringe website or app.
Well, it sounds amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me, James.
Thank you for having me, Alistair.
And I'm delighted to say I'm now joined by Alan Bissett, the man behind the show When Billy Met Alasdair. Hello, Alan. How you doing?
Hello there, Alistair. It's good to be back.
It's great to see you again. It's been a wee while. So tell us, for those who don't know, first of all, who Billy is, who Alasdair is, and how this show came about.
Okay, so Billy is Billy Connolly, who I'm going to presume everybody knows, but I've since become aware that some of the teenagers and people in their early 20s who've been to see the show did not know who Billy Connolly was,
Oh,
but
wow.
there we are. Very, very famous Scottish comedian, just in case you don't know. The Alistair is Alistair Gray, the novelist and painter who died, I think, maybe 5 years ago, something like that.
Yeah.
And the premise of the show is based on this photograph.
Fantastic. So for those listening, Alan has got a fantastic picture of Billy and Alasdair. Billy's looking slightly askance at Alasdair as he looks down.
That is a photograph of Billy Connolly at the launch party for Lanark in the Third
Oh,
Eye Centre in Glasgow, which is now the CCA, taken by a man called George Oliver. And I was given that photograph by a friend of mine, Rog Glass, who you might know,
really?
who is a writer. and whose book, Alasdair Gray, A Secretary's Biography, I can thoroughly recommend. He was working for Alasdair Gray as a secretary, and Alasdair gave him that photograph one week because he couldn't afford to pay him. So he looked around and, would you like this? And Rog gave it to me as a present, and I put it in a frame. It's been hanging in my living room for a number of years, and I've always looked at that and thought, what did Billy Connolly and Alasdair Gray talk about
Yeah.
at the launch for Lanark? And that is the basis of the show.
So these are two characters who mean a lot to so many people, including myself. So what are they to you? What do they represent to you?
Well, I mean, Billy Connolly probably represents to me what he represents to everybody in Scotland. He goes into all of our childhoods. Probably we've all got the experience of sitting around with our families watching the old VHS tapes, or maybe back in the 70s, the LPs, listening to the LPs,
Yeah.
and just being in absolute stitches. And it was a thing that kind of bonded us together as a family, bonded us together as a nation,
Yes,
actually.
absolutely.
And there was something like, because when you're younger, you're not used to hearing Scottish accents on television a great deal. So to see somebody command audiences like that, and also one of the formative experiences was that concert he did, an audience with Billy Connolly, but it was all celebrities in the audience. And they're all pissing themselves laughing at it, and he's got such confidence and joie de vivre, and he's a figure that means so much to so many people, and was an influence. No, in the sense that I wanted to go on and become a comedian,
No.
but I thought if somebody with that accent can go on and do something, then maybe so can I.
Yeah. The only man, you say about bringing families together, he was the only man my granny let away with swearing. He was all right. It was okay when Billy did it, but
Funny
nobody else
that.
could do that.
I mean, by the standards of the day, it was probably considered quite, blue.
Yeah.
Although when you look at later comedians like, Roy Chubby Brown and stuff like that, he's relatively tame in comparison. But he did everything with a wee twinkle.
Yeah.
And he had so much charm that, like you say, little kids like myself and your granny could watch it and get just as much out of it. It's extraordinary. So, yeah, Billy Connolly's part of my childhood, as he is everybody's. Alistair Gray I discovered a bit later through this novel, obviously, Lanark,
Yeah.
which is the book he's most known for. And much of the play centres around the writing and the launch of this book.
Right.
So I read that in, I think, maybe my early 20s because I knew I wanted to be a writer, and everybody was saying, if you're going to be a Scottish writer, you need to read Alistair Gray and you need to start with Lanark. And it's a mountain to climb. I don't know if you remember the first time you read Lanark.
I can remember it clearly. Yeah.
It's not an easy read.
No, it's not. No.
But if you persevere, the reward is immense. When
Yes.
you get to the top of the hill, when you look around, there's no other book like it in world literature. It's completely unique.
Yeah.
And I think there's something about the contrast between those two figures, Alistair and Billy, both Glaswegians, both of a similar generation,
Hmm.
both in very, very different fields. So I wanted to highlight those contrasts, but also to start to look at some of the similarities between them as well and talk about them as almost like alter egos of each other in the play, in the same way that Lanark is a book about alter egos.
Of course. So you've got this photograph.
Hmm.
How do you even begin to decide you're going to do a show about this? What was your start? Aside from the photograph, did you think I'm going to do this as a one-man show? I'm presuming it is a one-man show.
It is a one-man show.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, so how did you begin to think this is interesting? I wonder what it's discussed to now being at the Fringe with this show.
Well, there was a commission from the Alistair Gray Archive and the Glasgow International Comedy Festival because I'd spoken to Saoirse Dallas,
Mm-hmm.
who is in charge of the Alistair Gray Archive and worked with Alistair very closely. And I'd said to her about this photograph, I was like, I would really love to write a play about that one day. I think there's something, I think there's a story in there. And she went away and got some funding for me to develop the script. And we premiered it at Grey Day, which is in the Oran Moor in March, just there. There was two comedians who were also commissioned to do responses to Alistair's work. One was Ashley Story, another was Christopher MacArthur Boyd,
Mm-hmm.
and I was the third comedian. I didn't think of myself as a comedian, but that's how it was billed for the purposes of it, so they could put it on at the Glasgow Comedy Festival as well. So that was the sort of mechanical process of how it came about. But there's also the creative nut that you have to crack. Because I remember when I was talking to Saoirse about it in the early days, she's like, well, what's it going to be about? I was like, well, Alistair meeting Billy at the book launch.
Aye.
She's like, but that's not dramatic. You know, Billy Connolly turns up at a book launch and they have a chat. Like, how do you get a play out of that? And I was like, that's a good point.
That's a good
So
question.
it's actually kind of developed into more of a exploration of their origin stories.
Right.
If you think about them as two superhero origin stories that are happening in parallel, and gradually those stories start to converge and meet at the end when they have the conversation at the launch. Then you've got the question of the staging. And initially, I wanted to hire an actor to play Billy. Um, and then I realised, well, two things. One, it would be more of a creative challenge if I was to do it myself,
Mhm.
trying to juggle both of these personas on stage. And two, I would have to pay an actor.
Yes.
And it's expensive enough taking a show to the Fringe, but if you've got to pay an actor, if you there goes your profit. So there were creative as well as practical reasons why I decided to do it myself.
We should let people know before we get any further where and when they can see you at the Fringe.
Okay, so it's on at the Scottish Storytelling Centre. I don't know if people know that venue. It's on the Royal Mile, John Knox's house. Really easy venue to reach, very close to Waverley Station, and a beautiful theatre, 100-seater theatre. The acoustics are perfect. Every performer I speak to who's played there says you don't need a microphone or anything. It's just a wonderful space. Because so many venues at the Fringe are just very sterile boxes, and this is not that because it's designed for storytelling. And it's on until the 23rd of August with some selected dates off in between so I can rest and also so I can go and see Oasis.
Of course. It's a great venue. I think I saw you doing Moira, one of your Moira monologues there. I'm pretty sure it's a
Very
great
possibly.
um so what can audiences expect? I know you don't give away any spoilers, but when they walk into that space, what awaits them?
Well, it's going to be me performing as Alistair Gray and welcoming them to the show. And then I shift into Billy Connolly. And the only difference, because folk were like, oh, you're going to wear a wig
Aye,
and, you're going to have a bit, Billy was very flamboyantly dressed. I mean, my concession is the beard.
aye,
I've got a goatee beard because both men had goatee beards.
yes.
And I've always wanted to grow a goatee beard. And this has given me an excuse to do it because you can just say, oh, it's for the show. I
Yeah.
once dyed my hair black when I'd already started to go grey and I dyed my hair black for a show I did called The Red Hourglass,
Oh
in
yes.
which several species of spider, and one of the spiders is a black widow. So I dyed my hair black for that, and it worked for the show. But off stage, people were like, "Alan, come on, why don't you just grow old with dignity?" And I went, "It's for the show. It's for the show." Okay. So anyway, it's for the show.
Yes.
Um, but basically, the costume change is me putting on a pair of glasses and me taking off a pair of glasses. And when Billy comes on stage, he is essentially talking to a room full of people who are at his 60th birthday party. And the room is full of celebrities. Sylvester Stallone's there, and Dustin Hoffman, and Robin Williams, and Eric Clapton, and Keith Richards. People who he's actually friends with in real
Yeah.
life. And he's talking to them all, and he makes a speech. And throughout the course of the speech, he starts telling them about the launch party they attended for Alistair Gray in Sauchiehall Street in Glasgow. And that's where we start to get the storyline, as it were, underway.
Do you do, because both men had very inimitable voices, do you do impressions at all, if that's the right word?
This has been a bone of contention throughout the rehearsals. So the director is Kirsten MacLean, who's a fantastic actor and director. I don't know if people know her. She's most famous for Limmy's show. You know
Right.
the Kill Jester sketch?
Yes, absolutely.
She's Jester,
Yeah.
right? And she's a good friend of mine. I love working with her. We've done great work together in the past. So I brought her on, and once we started rehearsals, I was trying to do impressions, right? So my Billy Connolly was a bit down here, and my Alistair Gray was sort of a bit like this. And she's like, nah, nah, stop doing that. And I was like, but that's how they talked. And she's like, if you talk like that in the show, people are going to think they're cartoon characters.
Right.
You're not going to be able to reach the depths. You need to bring both of them closer in to who you are
Right.
and closer to your voice. And she gave me certain key techniques for how to unlock each character. Billy's got very long stretched vowels. Talks like this. So I was talking to my friend Elton John, and she says, as long as you stretch your vowels and you speak in a Glaswegian accent, people will understand you're being Billy. And with Alistair, as long as you enunciate every single syllable, That was his thing. He
Yes.
spoke very clearly and in a very clipped manner like this. That'll preserve your voice. And foolishly, I just ignored her and lost my voice a week before the opening of the show, which meant we had to cancel all the scheduled rehearsals and a preview show. So by the time I got to the actual Fringe to do it for the first time in front of a paying audience, I'd never run the whole show right through.
Oh my God.
And I have never been more terrified. And that is why you should always listen to your director.
Oh God. So, because we should say that you've done a couple of performances so far.
I've done two.
Yeah. How's it going? What's the
It's going
reaction?
extremely well. Aye, the reaction has been greater than I could have possibly imagined. We've had a couple of five-star reviews already. The audiences are coming out smiling and happy, which is all you can ask for, really. And people were saying that they felt quite moved by it. I mean, my worry, because it's a show about Billy Connolly, that people were expecting gag, 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 gag. And obviously, I've tried to get across his humour because that's who he is. But it's no a stand-up comedy set.
Yeah.
It's a storytelling set. I'm telling this, they're telling the stories of their lives. So I was worried that unless people were absolutely rolling about the aisles laughing that the show was failing, and that's not the case.
Mhm.
It's taking them on a journey, a narrative journey. It's not necessarily about, a good big. Hopefully, you'll have a good big night out, but
Yes.
it's a play.
Yeah,
It's a play.
absolutely. You're not getting people going, doing continent Snickers or anything like
Exactly. Aye, I don't do the Glasgow crucifixion scene.
that. And going, I mean, again, going back to how you wrote these characters, I guess you couldn't do any research if you've just got that picture. I mean, did you try and get in touch with anyone who was also at the launch or anything
Yep.
like that?
I did. I spoke to Professor Alan Reich, who's a professor of Scottish literature at Glasgow University. He was there that night.
Was
Now,
it really?
obviously, it's 1981, so, God, about 40 odd years ago,
Uh,
more. And he gave me his impressions from that evening. He said there was a bit of a stir when Billy came into the room, because obviously he was already very famous by that point. So people were like, oh, it's Connolly. And he told me where he was sitting and, how he was conducting himself and stuff like that. But to be honest, the real meat of it is the conversation between him and Alistair.
mhm.
And they were the only two people privy to that conversation. So I had to take dramatic license to invent it. But the play makes a point of saying to the audience that the conversation is invented.
Yeah.
Because Alistair's already dead. I've
Mhm.
got no access to Connolly. And even if I did, he's not going to be able to remember word for word what he said
No.
to Alistair Gray, 45 years ago or whatever. So I do make a point of talking about the artifice of it as well, in order to cover myself there, really, but also to make a creative point about the way that we fictionalise. Alistair Gray himself broke the third wall very often
Absolutely.
and made you aware that you were reading fiction as you were reading it. So I sort of play on that a little bit.
And does that kind of give you a freedom as a writer because you've not got any kind of second-hand or even third-hand accounts of what may have happened that night?
Yes, it does. I mean, if there was a transcript to the conversation that they had, well, obviously you're completely limited by that because it would be on the historical record. So it was the freedom to invent their conversation that drew me towards the project. I wanted to have a conversation that felt natural, the sort of conversation that they could conceivably have had in that room, but also one that spoke to some of the themes that are being addressed throughout the show.
And you're obviously you're back in Edinburgh doing the show. You've done quite a few in Edinburgh over the years. Is it feel the same to you? Has it changed at all?
It's always exactly the same experience. It's always completely overwhelming because, especially my shows at night, right? So this is what you do. You go, oh well, I'm not until 8:30. My days are free. They're not free because obviously you're doing things like this, and
Yes.
you're trying to go out and see other people's shows, and you're maybe running your lines, and oh, I missed a line the night before. I need to nail that section down a bit harder, and you never really leave the bubble of the Fringe. But it's a wonderful bubble to be in. It's
Yeah.
like that bubble that the Good Witch of the North arrives in The Wizard of Oz. This wee pink bubble that you're just floating about in for essentially 3 weeks. I love it. I love the Fringe.
Yeah. And are there things that you're particularly looking forward to while you're through?
In terms of shows that I'd like to
Yeah, in
see.
terms of shows or just Edinburgh Fringe things that you do.
Well, I mean, this is the thing about the Scottish Storytelling Centre. It has a really wonderful programme
Yeah, it does.
that
Yeah.
I think often gets overlooked because everybody looks at what's on at the Gilded Balloon and what's on at the TVA and all the stand and all this kind of stuff. you know, the big venues that everybody knows. And I think because the Scottish Storytelling Centre curates a programme of mainly Scottish themed work,
Mhm.
people think, oh, that's a bit parochial, you know, but this speaks to the whole bigger conversation we have about Scottish culture and parochialism and the way it's perceived and all this. You know, it's great that there's a venue that is platforming mainly Scottish artists because it's a festival in Edinburgh and you'll really struggle to find Scottish performers there.
Yeah.
You know that I'm not saying it should only be Scottish performers at the Fringe. That's ridiculous. But Scottish performers kind of get lost a little bit, and the Scottish Storytelling Centre makes a point of platforming them, and they always have a really wonderful range of work. So I'm looking forward to seeing Mark Hanna's show, Athens of the North, which is about Edinburgh and his upbringing there, and how it's changed and become kind of commercialised over the years, over his lifetime. Um, I saw Luke Wright's show actually. I don't know if you know the poet Luke Wright.
I do know the poet look right. Yeah,
Yeah,
I thought about it for a
fantastic
while,
poet
but yeah.
performer. Yeah, I always love his shows. He's just such an electrifying performer and wordsmith. And he's on at the God, I've forgotten the name of the venue, Pleasantstone, doing a show called Pub Grub, which I've seen and I absolutely loved. But I would encourage everybody to check out the Scottish Storytelling Centre programme. There's loads of gems there.
I would agree. I've got in my kind of picks for the Fringe. I think there's maybe three or four that are in that. It's a real wee oasis while all the madness is going on. I think,
Yes.
especially on the Royal Mile, because you know how mad that can get. Because as you say, it's a proper theatre. You're not going upstairs in a pub or
Mm,
into a hotel room as can happen these days. There's a space for that as well, but this is a space where you are going to the theatre, and that's the way it's run. And yeah, I mean, I know Loman Campbell's doing a show there, Kirsty Law later on in the month's doing a show. There's some fantastic Scottish music and theatre going on
mm.
there. I would, yeah, check it out without a doubt. And so I'm just thinking about you losing your voice. What a nightmare in a run up to a show. I mean, that just must have been. I was. You must have been worried.
I was terrified.
Yeah.
Now, I've been performing for 25 years. I have never been more scared before I went on stage. It was one of these experiences that probably every performer can talk about, where you're like, this is going to be a disaster, and I've just got to get through it and accept the fact that this show is going to fall flat on its arse, and then apologise to the audience afterwards and explain about my voice and how we had to cancel rehearsals, and hopefully they'll be forgiving. And also, we had three reviewers in, so you're like, oh, Jesus. And I think possibly the fear
Mhm.
is what made it such an electrifying experience because I went on in a heightened state. And as soon as I got the first sort of warm ripple of laughter for the audience, and it was a full house as well, which helps, the atmosphere, it's like slipping into a bath. You know, you just feel your whole system start to relax. So I went on stiff as a board, and within about a minute and a half, I could feel it flowing through me. It's like a sort of magic spell. And at the end of it, God, I didn't want to over dramatize it, but I just about burst into tears.
Imagine.
Then I told the audience this is the first time I've ever run the show through in its entirety. And I think they realised that they'd seen something. I don't mean unique in terms of the content of the show. I mean, hopefully they felt that it was something unique in terms of the content of the show. But the fact that they were seeing the first time it had ever been stitched together, even the rehearsals would never manage to achieve that. And I think that maybe meant something to them as well as it did to me.
And you said a moment ago how some people might think, oh, this is Scottish artists or Scottish shows at the Scottish Storytelling Centre, therefore it might be parochial. But actually, you're dealing with two people who have been international. I mean, Lanark's a novel which is known far and wide. And
Mhm.
Billy, of course, I mean, I lived in Australia for a while and forever was being asked to do Billy Connolly impersonations. This is a guy who, again, is known all over the world.
Mhm.
So you really have tapped into two Scottish giants. I don't know if that was deliberate. I think it wasn't because you wouldn't have had that photograph, but it happens that is the case.
Well, I mean, obviously the show came from the photograph, but the reason that the photograph appealed to me is because they're two Scottish giants.
Yeah.
And if there'd been any other two figures, it might not have suggested itself to me. I think it's because it's them and because they're so iconic and they're so different. I thought let's try and find the similarities between their life stories as well. Um, but the iconicness, is that a word? Iconicness? I'm not
Let's
sure.
yeah.
Iconicity. you know, I don't know what the noun is. Is I think what's drawing people in,
Yes.
but also you're aware that people are bringing their own memories and their own experiences. I mean, there are people who are coming along and they're chatting to me afterwards, and some of them are saying things like, I'd never even heard of Alasdair Gray. I
Yeah.
came along because the show's about Billy Connolly, or I
Yeah.
came along because I'd seen you in the Moira monologues. Or, you know, there's people like, oh, I've read Lanark, and so I wanted to see what you were going to do with Alistair. Or some people saying, I knew Alistair.
Mhm.
I saw Billy Connolly perform with the Humble Bums. So people are bringing their own experiences and memories and what they value about those characters to the show. So that's quite a nice experience for me.
Yeah. Because I think everyone who's spent any time in the West End of Glasgow will probably have an Alistair story. And anyone
Exactly.
who's been in Glasgow or probably Scotland will have a Billy story, whatever that may be.
Hmm.
Alan, it's always a pleasure catching up with you. The
Likewise.
show sounds amazing. I'm hoping to get through and see it myself. But yeah, all the very best with it.
Thank you, Alistair. Good to see you again.
And we'll be back soon with someone completely different.